Some places wait for the right person to find them. Ethan Carter held the rusted key between his fingers, the cold biting through his gloves as Scout, his 6-year-old German shepherd, sat alert beside him, ears pricked and amber eyes scanning the cliffs ahead. The watchtower rose from the edge of the bay like a forgotten sentinel, its weathered stones gray and slick with frost, windows staring blankly over the misty water below. A salty wind whipped across the path, carrying the scent of pine and sea spray, and as Ethan stepped onto the narrow trail, he felt the weight of solitude and memory pressing against his broad shoulders, a quiet that only years of service and long nights on lonely roads could have taught him to bear. Scout nudged his leg, pawing at a patch of uneven ground where the wind seemed to whisper through the cracks of the stone, and Ethan followed the dog's gaze to the crumbling doorway, half covered with ivy, as if nature itself was trying to keep the watchtower hidden. He inhaled deeply, the metallic tang of rust and wet stone filling his lungs, and for a moment the past and present blurred, the silence around them echoing the hum of memories he had tried to bury. Stepping inside, the floorboards creaked under his weight, the sound sharp and deliberate in the vast emptiness, dust motes drifting in shafts of pale sunlight that slanted through the narrow windows. Scout moved ahead with careful precision, nose low to the ground, picking up the faint traces of someone who had walked these halls long ago. Ethan's fingers brushed along the rough stone walls, feeling the heartbeat of the place beneath his touch, a rhythm almost alive, and as he ascended the spiral staircase that hugged the inner wall, each step releasing clouds of cold air that made the silence even more profound. In the tower's small chamber at the top, he paused, letting his eyes adjust, taking in the view of the bay below, ice catching the morning sun like scattered shards of glass, waves rolling quietly beneath the cliffs. Scout sat by the narrow window, tail flicking, ears swiveling at the faintest creak from below, and Ethan knew that the dog sensed more than he could see, a sixth sense honed from years of searching and saving, a guide through both terrain and mystery. Near the far corner of the chamber, a loose plank drew Scout's attention, and his soft growl vibrated through the quiet, insistent but calm. Ethan knelt, fingers pressing against the wood, feeling a subtle hum, a pulse beneath the floor that was steady and deliberate, almost like the tower itself was breathing. The air smelled faintly of salt, pine, and something metallic, a scent that spoke of hidden stories and secrets long forgotten. With a careful push, the plank shifted, revealing a narrow opening that descended into shadow, and Scout stepped closer, paw raised, amber eyes bright with anticipation. Ethan swallowed, feeling a surge of both apprehension and wonder, the kind that only comes when the ordinary world tilts slightly and the impossible seems within reach. A low breeze stirred through the opening, carrying with it a whisper of mystery, a promise of discovery, and as he reached down to steady the ladder that led into darkness, he caught Scout's gaze, understanding that together they were about to uncover something long hidden, something that had waited decades for the right hands and the right heart to find it. The ladder descended into darkness, narrow and steep, each rung slick with the moisture that had seeped through decades of stone. Ethan took a deep breath, feeling the chill of the air that seemed to have been trapped here long before he arrived, and Scout padded carefully beside him, paws light on the metal rungs, nose twitching at the faint scent of damp wood and earth. As they reached the bottom, the confined space opened into a small chamber, walls lined with stone shelves, dust thick on every surface, and the air held a subtle metallic tang that hinted at something hidden. Ethan knelt, brushing away decades of dust to reveal a small chest, its wood darkened and edges worn, but the lock surprisingly intact. He ran his fingers over the metalwork, feeling the cold, and Scout circled, ears alert, as if sensing the anticipation that Ethan carried in his chest. With a careful twist of the old key, the lock clicked, and the chest creaked open to reveal a collection of faded papers, a few small trinkets, and a set of brass instruments that gleamed faintly in the pale light streaming through a narrow window high above. Ethan lifted the papers, letting the brittle pages slip through his fingers, each one a map, a note, or a journal entry from someone who had once called this place home. The handwriting was precise, meticulous, each line a whisper of the past, and as he read, he felt a connection across time, a story waiting to be finished. Scout pressed close, nose nudging a rolled parchment that had slipped beneath the chest, and Ethan unrolled it to reveal a detailed schematic of the Watchtower itself, markings indicating hidden compartments and pathways that were not obvious to the casual observer. His heart quickened with the realization that the place was not just a tower but a carefully designed sanctuary, a repository for memories and secrets alike. The chamber seemed to breathe around them, the faint drafts carrying the whisper of wind through cracks above, and the rhythmic patter of Scout's paws echoed against the stone floor, grounding Ethan in the present while the past unfolded before him. He traced the lines of the schematic with his finger, imagining the care and foresight of the person who had built this, someone who had known the value of time, of preservation, and perhaps of trust. The soft scrape of a hidden panel sliding against stone drew his attention to the far wall, where a subtle seam hinted at a passage concealed for decades. Scout barked once, low and measured, his body tense but controlled, signaling that the next discovery awaited just beyond that wall. Ethan moved forward, heart steady, breath calm but tingling with anticipation, pressing his hands against the cool stone to slide the panel open. The reveal was immediate, a narrow corridor, lined with aged timber and lit by shafts of light that filtered through tiny cracks above, as though the tower itself guided them toward the truth. As they stepped inside, the scent of old cedar and iron filled the air, and every sound, Scout's careful steps, the distant call of gulls over the bay, the soft whistle of the wind, felt amplified in the enclosed space. Ethan ran his fingers along the walls, feeling the subtle grooves and indentations, each one a clue, each one a whisper from the past. The corridor led them to a small chamber, almost hidden, where a collection of glass jars reflected the muted light, containing objects delicate and precise. Compass pieces, instruments, and a collection of old keys whose purpose was immediately unclear, but undeniably important. Scout padded closer to a wooden crate in the corner, nudging it until it shifted to reveal a false bottom, beneath which lay more papers, journals detailing daily routines, notes about the structure, and observations about the world outside, the tides, the weather, the movement of ships along the bay. Ethan read carefully, realizing that the previous inhabitant had recorded not only personal memories, but also detailed instructions and observations meant to guide a future occupant, someone who could understand the significance of each small item, each hidden compartment. Hours passed unnoticed as Ethan sifted through the layers of history, Scout always at his side, ears flicking to sounds too subtle for human hearing, eyes bright with the intelligence that had guided them through countless silent moments. Finally, Ethan paused, looking at Scout, both understanding that they had uncovered something greater than a simple inheritance. A carefully preserved story, a hidden legacy, a puzzle that connected the past to the present. The chamber seemed to exhale with them, a quiet approval, and Ethan felt a profound sense of purpose settle in his chest. He stood, taking a deep breath, letting the weight of discovery and the promise of what lay ahead fill him, and Scout nudged his hand, tail wagging slowly, as if to say that together, they were ready to step further into the mysteries of the tower, to follow the path that had been waiting for decades, guided by both instinct and the silent whispers of history itself. The corridor led Ethan and Scout deeper into the watchtower, narrowing slightly as the stone walls closed in, the air cooler and heavier with each step, carrying a faint scent of cedar and aged paper. Ethan's hand brushed along the rough-hewn walls, following subtle grooves and irregularities that hinted at the careful construction of someone who had poured intention into every inch of the tower. Scout padded silently beside him, nose to the ground, occasionally pausing to lift a paw or tilt his head, alert to vibrations and echoes beyond Ethan's perception. At the end of the passage, a set of stairs spiraled downward, the treads worn smooth by decades of careful use, and Ethan stepped carefully, boots scraping lightly against the stone. Faint light filtered through narrow slits high above, casting elongated shadows that danced along the walls, lending the space an almost otherworldly quality. At the base of the stairs, they entered a small antechamber, shelves lining the walls with objects long forgotten, a layer of dust covering delicate instruments, rolled maps, and journals bound in leather that smelled faintly of resin and the salt from the nearby bay. Ethan knelt to lift one of the journals, its pages fragile but legible, detailing meticulous observations of the tides, weather patterns, and the watchtower's maintenance, as if the previous inhabitant had expected someone to come and follow in his footsteps. Scout's ears pricked at the faint sound of water dripping somewhere deeper in the tower, a subtle reminder that even in silence, the structure held life of its own. Ethan followed the dog's gaze to a section of the wall where stone seemed slightly uneven. Pressing against the surface, he felt a subtle give, a hidden latch. With a gentle push, a small panel swung open, revealing a narrow cavity just large enough for a single person to peer inside, where an assortment of small artifacts and carefully folded documents rested. Each item seemed charged with history, telling a story of careful thought and preservation, the meticulous attention to detail reflecting a life spent in devotion to both structure and purpose. Ethan removed a bundle of papers, unrolling maps that revealed pathways, hidden compartments, and notes on the natural world surrounding the watchtower. Scout nudged a small brass instrument with his nose, and Ethan picked it up, turning it over to see intricate etchings and mechanisms whose purpose was initially unclear, yet undeniably significant. The atmosphere in the chamber was thick with anticipation, the quiet only interrupted by the faint creak of wood settling and the soft scuffle of Scout's paws. Ethan carefully arranged the papers, instruments, and maps, creating a temporary order that allowed him to absorb the information fully. He traced his finger over notes indicating times, positions, and natural phenomena, a puzzle that, once solved, promised to reveal not only the tower's secrets but the intentions of the one who had hidden them. Scout let out a low, approving growl and pressed closer, guiding Ethan to a small door at the back of the chamber. As they opened it, a cool draft swept past, carrying the faint tang of sea air mingled with old pine, and the space beyond seemed larger than expected, a hidden room filled with objects that reflected both the utility and care of their previous owner. Sunlight filtered through a tiny window high on the wall, illuminating stacks of papers, a few meticulously kept tools, and a journal left open, pages yellowed but perfectly preserved. Ethan bent to read, absorbing the careful record of observations, measurements, and reflections, feeling a connection to someone he had never met, but whose presence was imprinted on every detail of the room. Scout's tail flicked in measured excitement, sensing the importance of each discovery, and Ethan realized that the watchtower was more than a building. It was a repository of thought, care, and secrets, a living memory waiting for the right hands to continue its story. Time seemed suspended as Ethan examined each item, the outside world fading away, replaced by the quiet rhythm of discovery, the gentle rustle of pages, and Scout's steady breathing. Each discovery deepened his understanding, each artifact and note offering clues to the intentions and life of the previous inhabitant, and with every step, the sense of purpose grew, a quiet assurance that they were exactly where they needed to be, guided by instinct, curiosity, and the subtle hand of fate that had brought them to this hidden corner of the world. The hidden room opened into a larger space than Ethan had imagined, high ceilings arched above, carved stone reflecting faint light that filtered through narrow, dust-flecked windows. The air smelled faintly of salt, old wood, and the faint tang of minerals drawn from the bay below, a mixture that spoke of age, preservation, and the quiet passage of time. Scout padded forward, ears moving independently to catch the subtlest sound, tail low but swishing with measured anticipation, as if guiding Ethan to the most important parts of the room. Ethan's boots clicked softly against the stone floor as he moved, eyes tracing the outlines of shelves stacked with carefully labeled jars, boxes, and a scattering of handwritten notes whose faded ink hinted at decades of careful observation. He knelt to examine a stack of maps, each annotated meticulously with dates, tide information, and cryptic symbols indicating paths, hidden compartments, and points of interest around the watchtower and the surrounding cliffs. Scout nosed at a wooden crate, nudging it until it shifted to reveal a false bottom concealing more papers and objects that seemed both ordinary and extraordinary. A set of brass instruments, delicate compasses, and small vials filled with preserved specimens. Ethan carefully lifted. A journal bound in leather, pages crisp despite the years, chronicling the life and work of someone devoted to the tower and the natural world, notes about weather, the movement of ships, and observations about the wildlife that inhabited the cliffs and bay. Each entry was written with precision and patience, as though meant to be discovered by someone who could understand its value and continue its story. Scout let out a soft, approving bark, his body tense with focus, directing Ethan toward a narrow doorway partially concealed by stacked crates. The door led to a winding corridor, walls lined with stone and occasional timber supports, the faint scent of cedar blending with the dampness of the stone. Ethan moved slowly, feeling the cool air brush against his face and the weight of anticipation in his chest. The corridor opened into a small chamber where a beam of sunlight caught a stack of papers, illuminating diagrams, letters, and notes detailing the tower's construction, hidden compartments, and the care taken to maintain its secrecy over decades. Scout's paw tapped gently on the floor near a loose plank, and Ethan knelt to examine it, finding a hidden latch that revealed another layer of the room, a shallow cavity containing keys, small instruments, and personal mementos, each telling a story of thought, care, and the passage of time. The quiet in the chamber was profound, punctuated only by Scout's careful movements and the faint creak of settling stone, and Ethan felt a deep connection to the previous inhabitant, as though their presence lingered in the very air around him. He traced lines of ink across maps and pages, imagining the hands that had recorded every detail with deliberate attention, and for a moment, the centuries seemed to fold together, past and present meeting in the dim light of the tower. Scout pressed close, nuzzling Ethan's side, eyes bright and alert, communicating without words that the next discovery awaited just beyond the corner of the room. Ethan adjusted his grip on the journals and maps, stepping forward with measured care, feeling the subtle vibrations of the stone beneath his feet, as if the tower itself were breathing and guiding them further into the secrets it had preserved. Each step revealed more of the ingenuity and foresight of someone who had built this place to endure, to hide, and to share its story only with those who were willing to notice the quiet clues. The chamber seemed alive with history, each object a marker, each note a guide, and Ethan realized that the Watchtower was not merely a building, but a vessel of memory, carefully curated over decades, waiting for the right person to read, understand, and carry forward its legacy. Scout sat briefly by his side, amber eyes reflecting the soft light, and Ethan inhaled the mixture of scents, wood, stone, salt, and ink, feeling a profound sense of responsibility settle over him. Together, they explored further, guided by instinct, intuition, and the subtle pulse of the tower itself, knowing that each discovery brought them closer to the story hidden within, a story that was theirs now to uncover and honor. The hidden corridor opened into a larger, vaulted space that seemed to hum with quiet energy, the air cool and tinged with the faint scent of salt water and pine from the cliffs outside. Ethan stepped carefully over uneven stone flooring, boots echoing softly against the walls, while Scout padded beside him, nose low and ears flicking at the faintest whisper of movement, alert to sounds beyond human perception. Sunlight filtered through narrow windows, casting streaks of pale gold across scattered papers, instruments, and small artifacts meticulously arranged as though awaiting discovery. Ethan bent to examine a bundle of letters tied with faded ribbon, reading lines in careful handwriting that described not only the Watchtower and its structure, but also observations about the tides, weather, and wildlife that had persisted across decades. Each note revealed a mind attentive to detail, meticulous in care, and deeply connected to the rhythm of the world outside. Scout nudged a brass instrument with his nose, and Ethan lifted it, turning it in his hands to inspect the finely etched markings and delicate mechanisms, marveling at the precision and thought embedded in its creation. Moving further, they discovered a small alcove concealed behind a panel of worn stone, the opening narrow and inviting, as though the tower itself guided them deeper into its secrets. Inside, the chamber contained a series of journals, maps, and diagrams, each carefully annotated with symbols and notes that hinted at hidden compartments, secret pathways, and carefully planned observations meant for someone who would understand and preserve them. Ethan ran his fingers over the pages, feeling the weight of history and intention in every stroke of the pen, each note a bridge between the past and the present, and Scout circled the room, alert and deliberate, guiding him to points of interest with subtle gestures and careful pauses. The quiet was profound, punctuated only by the soft rustle of papers and the occasional tap of Scout's paw, and Ethan felt a sense of reverence, as though the room itself were alive, its secrets breathing in the silence and waiting to be understood. He carefully arranged the documents, tracing lines on the maps with his finger, imagining the careful planning that had gone into every compartment, every annotation, every hidden space, and realizing that the Watchtower was more than a building. It was a repository of thought, care, and foresight, designed to endure and guide those who came after. Scout paused by a stack of journals, tail flicking, ears high, signaling that the next discovery was near, and Ethan followed, pressing against a loose floorboard to reveal a shallow cavity containing small keys, a folded map, and a journal detailing routines, observations, and the subtle interactions with the environment surrounding the tower. The morning light shifted through the narrow windows, casting dancing shadows across the floor, and Ethan felt a quiet awe settle over him, the weight of discovery mingling with a sense of responsibility to honor the care and intention embedded in every object. Step by step, they moved through the hidden spaces, Scout guiding with silent certainty, ears flicking, nose twitching, as if in conversation with the building itself, while Ethan absorbed each revelation, each hidden detail, understanding that the tower held a story of vigilance, preservation, and dedication meant to be carried forward. Hours passed unnoticed as they explored, the rhythm of their movement, the soft echo of Scout's paws, and the quiet rustle of papers creating a meditative cadence. And Ethan realized that the inheritance was not only the tower itself but the stewardship of its secrets, the continuation of a legacy carefully crafted to endure, inspire, and teach those willing to notice the subtle language of history etched in stone, paper, and wood. The chamber seemed to exhale around them, a quiet acknowledgement of their presence, and Ethan understood that together with Scout, he was not merely exploring a building but walking through a living memory, a network of thought and care preserved through decades, waiting for hands, eyes, and hearts ready to uncover, honor, and continue its story. The narrow chamber seemed to stretch farther than Ethan had expected, the shadows deepening in corners where light could not reach, and Scout's paws made soft, deliberate sounds as he led the way, nose twitching, ears attentive to vibrations that went unnoticed by human senses. Ethan followed, boots brushing lightly against the stone, feeling the coolness seep into his bones, mingling with the anticipation that had been building since they had entered the tower. The walls bore subtle markings, indentations that at first seemed accidental but revealed themselves as intentional guidance, pointing toward hidden alcoves and compartments that held objects and notes carefully preserved over decades. Ethan moved a stack of dusty maps aside and discovered a series of journals, each bound in leather and filled with handwritten observations, charts, and diagrams documenting the Watchtower, the surrounding cliffs, and the bay below. The ink was faded, but every letter was still legible, conveying both precision and care, as though the writer had known that one day someone would come to understand the significance of each note. Scout pressed his muzzle against a narrow crack near the floor, nudging it with his nose until a panel shifted slightly, revealing a shallow cavity that contained an assortment of small tools, brass instruments, and several folded maps with annotations that seemed to describe not only physical locations but also patterns of light, wind, and tide. Ethan unfolded one of the maps, tracing the lines with his finger, imagining the hands that had charted each observation, each line a deliberate act of attention to detail, a testament to foresight and thoughtfulness. He felt a deep connection to the previous occupant, sensing a care that had been embedded into the very walls and floors, a silent invitation to continue the legacy and honor the work that had come before. Scout moved closer to a corner where a small chest rested beneath a shelf, and with a gentle push, it revealed a hidden compartment inside containing personal effects, letters tied with ribbon, small carved figurines, and notes that chronicled routines, reflections on the environment, and observations about the passage of time. Ethan carefully examined each piece, the weight of the years settling around him like a gentle embrace, and he realized that the tower was more than a building. It was a vessel of memory, preserving the meticulous care, curiosity, and quiet patience of someone who had lived and observed with intention. He traced the lines of ink on the papers, imagining the footsteps that had passed over each stone, the moments of quiet contemplation, and the commitment to safeguarding both structure and story. The faint scent of salt and pine filled the chamber, mingling with the earthy aroma of stone and dust, creating a sensory memory that seemed to echo the rhythm of the natural world outside. Sunlight shifted through the narrow windows, casting moving patterns across the floor and illuminating the brass instruments and journals, highlighting the meticulous organization and the hidden thought in each placement. Scout paused by a low shelf, ears high, tail flicking in a subtle, measured way, signaling Ethan to examine a set of rolled parchments that had been tucked carefully beneath a wooden beam. Each scroll contained detailed sketches, observations, and annotations about the cliffs, tides, and weather patterns, evidence of a mind attuned to the environment and to the subtle patterns that unfolded over time. Ethan bent to study them, feeling a profound sense of reverence for the patience and dedication that had gone into every detail. Time seemed to slow in the chamber, the quiet filled with the soft movements of Scout, the rustle of papers, and the subtle echoes of the tower itself, as though it were alive, breathing with the past and present converging in the same space. Every artifact, every note, every small object spoke of careful observation, hidden planning, and the intention to leave a meaningful legacy. Ethan understood that this inheritance was more than the Watchtower itself. It was the responsibility to honor the past, to interpret the hidden guidance, and to carry forward the story that had waited patiently for someone willing to notice, appreciate, and continue the careful work embedded within its walls. Scout pressed close, eyes bright, tail moving slowly, affirming that they were exactly where they were meant to be, and together they moved forward into the quiet spaces, guided by instinct, patience, and the subtle rhythm of a legacy that spanned decades, waiting for them to uncover and understand every layer. Ethan stepped carefully through the chamber, each footfall echoing softly against the stone floor, the air thick with the quiet scent of cedar, salt, and aged paper. Scout moved beside him, alert and deliberate, amber eyes scanning every corner, tail low, but swishing with anticipation. The chamber opened into a wider room, where sunlight filtered through small, high windows, casting patterns of light and shadow that danced across stacks of journals, maps, and delicate instruments arranged with meticulous care. Ethan bent to examine a wooden box tucked beneath a shelf, lifting the lid to reveal folded parchments, brass compasses, and notes carefully annotated with observations about tides, wind patterns, and the motion of the sea. Each item spoke of patience, careful thought, and a deep understanding of the natural world surrounding the Watchtower. Scout nudged a rolled map with his nose, and Ethan unrolled it, tracing the lines with his finger, noting the hidden compartments and subtle markings that indicated pathways and secret spaces built into the structure itself. As he moved deeper into the room, he found a journal, pages yellowed but crisp, filled with precise handwriting documenting daily routines, observations of wildlife, and reflections on the passage of time. He read slowly, absorbing the intention and care embedded in every word, imagining the life of the previous occupant, someone who had lived in quiet devotion to both the Watchtower and the natural rhythms around it. Scout paused at the far corner of the room, ears raised, tail flicking, indicating the presence of another hidden feature, and Ethan approached a section of the wall that seemed slightly uneven. Pressing gently, a small panel shifted to reveal a narrow recess, inside of which lay a collection of small tools, keys, and additional notes detailing the careful maintenance and hidden mechanisms of the tower. Ethan carefully examined each piece, feeling the weight of responsibility and connection to someone who had clearly anticipated a future discoverer. The room seemed alive with history, every object and note a marker of patience and foresight, and the quiet was filled only with Scout's measured movements and the subtle creak of the stones settling beneath them. Ethan followed a set of faded markings on the floor that led to a small, low door, opening onto a narrow corridor that descended further into shadow. The air grew cooler, tinged with moisture and the faint metallic scent of iron, and Scout padded ahead, nose to the ground, guiding Ethan with a precision that spoke of instinct and trust honed through years of silent observation and service. At the end of the corridor, a hidden alcove revealed a small collection of artifacts, delicate instruments, folded papers, and personal mementos that reflected both utility and care, items arranged to preserve a story and a legacy. Ethan carefully lifted each artifact, feeling the subtle pulse of history in his hands, the sense that every detail had been intentionally preserved for discovery by someone who would understand its significance. Sunlight shifted through narrow slits in the wall, illuminating diagrams, journals, and brass instruments in a way that made the shadows move and dance, giving the chamber an almost living presence. Scout pressed close to Ethan's side, ears high, tail flicking, a silent partner in both exploration and understanding. Ethan felt a profound connection to the previous occupant, imagining the hours spent recording, organizing, and observing the world, the dedication and thoughtfulness woven into the very structure around them. Each object, each note, each careful placement told a story of quiet patience, attention to detail, and the preservation of knowledge and memory. The quiet seemed to acknowledge their presence, the chamber exhaling softly as if recognizing Ethan and Scout as the ones ready to continue the legacy. And with each careful step, they moved through the hidden spaces, guided by instinct, intuition, and the subtle rhythm of a tower that had been waiting patiently for decades, its secrets ready to be understood and honored by those who were willing to listen, observe, and care for the story that had been preserved within its walls. The corridor opened into a larger vaulted chamber, the stone walls cool beneath Ethan's fingers as he stepped forward, Scout close at his side, ears flicking with each subtle sound that carried through the still air. Shafts of pale sunlight streamed through narrow, high windows, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny fireflies in the golden light. The room was filled with objects carefully preserved over decades, rolled maps bound with ribbon, journals stacked neatly, brass instruments glinting faintly, and small tools arranged with precision as though waiting for a careful hand to uncover them. Ethan bent to lift a journal, the leather cover smooth and cool, pages filled with meticulous notes detailing not only the structure of the tower, but also observations about the tides, wind, wildlife, and subtle shifts in the environment that reflected the careful attention of someone deeply attuned to the world around them. Scout nosed at a brass compass lying nearby, then nudged a rolled parchment toward Ethan, tail flicking, amber eyes bright with anticipation. Ethan unrolled the parchment, revealing delicate diagrams marking hidden compartments, pathways, and positions of objects previously thought to be lost to time. Each line was precise, the markings suggesting careful thought and the foresight of someone who intended the Watchtower's secrets to be discovered and understood. The quiet of the chamber was profound, broken only by the soft rustle of pages and Scout's measured movements. Ethan pressed on, following the subtle groove of a wall panel to discover a hidden door, slightly ajar, revealing a narrow staircase descending further. The air grew cooler and carried the faint scent of the sea mingled with cedar, dust, and the faint metallic tang of aged iron. Scout padded ahead, nose to the ground, tail low but swishing with careful awareness, guiding Ethan with instinct honed from years of service and quiet observation. The staircase led to a chamber small and intimate, with a low ceiling and walls lined with shelves, each shelf containing objects carefully labeled, journals detailing daily routines, observations, and reflections on life within and around the tower. Ethan carefully lifted an instrument, delicate yet precise, etched with markings whose purpose was both practical and symbolic, revealing the dedication and thoughtfulness of the previous occupant. Papers scattered across the floor revealed further instructions, maps, and observations, a network of careful planning meant to preserve the legacy of the tower and its intricate design. Scouts circled, tail flicking, alert to subtle movements and sounds beyond Ethan's perception, nudging him toward another hidden recess beneath a shelf. Ethan lifted a bundle of letters and small mementos, pages and objects bearing the imprint of careful hands, their arrangement suggesting both utility and a story meant to guide, instruct, and inspire. The chambers seemed to breathe with them, a living presence of memory and purpose, as Ethan traced lines of ink, imagining the life of the person who had left these detailed records behind. Light shifted through the narrow window above, illuminating a brass instrument in the corner where Scout sat, ears high, tail moving with quiet excitement. Ethan felt a connection across time, a recognition of care, dedication, and intention that had been preserved for someone to discover. Each object, note, and artifact seemed to speak in silence, conveying trust and guidance, and he realized that the inheritance was not merely the Watchtower itself, but the responsibility to understand, preserve, and continue the story embedded within its walls. Scout pressed closer, a reassuring presence, amber eyes reflecting the pale sunlight as if acknowledging the journey, and Ethan inhaled deeply, the cool, salt-tinged air filling his lungs, feeling the weight and the quiet joy of discovery settle over him. Every step forward revealed new insight, a subtle clue, and a careful preservation of a legacy that had waited patiently for someone willing to observe, care, and carry forward the hidden story of the Watchtower and the life it had sheltered. Together, they explored each corner, each hidden space, guided by instinct, patience, and the subtle pulse of history, knowing that the tower's secrets, preserved through decades, had finally found attentive hands to uncover and honor them. Ethan climbed the narrow spiral staircase to the topmost chamber, Scout close at his side, paws patting softly against the worn stone. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of salt from the bay and the faint aroma of pine that had crept through tiny cracks in the tower over decades. Sunlight filtered through the slits in the stone walls, casting narrow beams that highlighted dust motes dancing in the air, giving the chamber a golden glow. At the top, the observation platform opened before them, a panoramic view of the cliffs, the bay, and the distant horizon where the sky met the water in muted shades of blue and gray. Ethan took a moment to breathe, feeling the wind brush against his face, carrying the quiet sound of waves breaking far below and the soft rustle of Scout's fur as the dog settled close to his side. His eyes traced the horizon, reflecting on the path that had brought them here, the careful exploration of hidden chambers, the discovery of maps, journals, and instruments that had preserved the knowledge and intent of someone long gone. Scout's amber eyes followed the shifting light, nose twitching at subtle scents carried on the breeze, and Ethan felt the steady reassurance of the dog's presence, the loyalty and intelligence that had guided him through every moment of uncertainty. The chamber itself seemed to exude a quiet energy, as though it recognized their patience, curiosity, and respect for the past. Ethan knelt beside a small ledge, brushing away dust to reveal a set of old, hand-drawn charts detailing not only the tower and its hidden compartments, but also intricate observations of tides, wind currents, and weather patterns that affected the bay below. Each line spoke of meticulous care, foresight, and a profound connection to the environment. Scout pawed gently at a loose stone, alerting Ethan to another hidden recess. Inside, a collection of personal effects, letters, and carefully preserved instruments awaited, each item a tangible link to the history of the place, reflecting thoughtfulness and intention across decades. Ethan examined each artifact, tracing lines of ink on maps and reading carefully pinned notes that revealed not only the functionality of the tower, but also reflections on life, time, and observation, creating a sense of continuity that bridged the past and present. The sunlight shifted slowly, illuminating details he had not noticed before, brass fittings on instruments, embossed lettering on journals, and faint sketches along the margins of the maps. Scout's tail flicked once in measured approval, sensing Ethan's quiet awe and understanding that the discoveries were more than objects. They were lessons in patience, care, and the value of preserving knowledge. Ethan stood and moved toward the edge of the platform, scanning the cliffs and the vast expanse of water, imagining the countless hours the previous occupant had spent observing, recording, and maintaining the tower, each action deliberate and intentional. The wind carried whispers of the past, the creak of wood and stone mingling with the distant rhythm of the waves, creating a harmony of environment, history, and memory. Scout pressed close, nudging Ethan's hand gently, and in that simple gesture, a sense of completion and connection washed over him. The Watchtower, once silent and forgotten, had revealed its secrets, shared its history, and offered a quiet invitation to honor and continue the legacy it held. Standing there, overlooking the bay, sunlight warming his face and wind brushing through his hair, Ethan felt a profound sense of belonging, a quiet understanding that patience, attentiveness, and loyalty, embodied in the partnership with Scout, had guided him to a place where the past and present met, where hidden stories could be uncovered, respected, and preserved, and where the quiet beauty of discovery offered a gentle reminder that sometimes the most meaningful treasures are not measured in gold or silver, but in the careful attention and reverence we bring to the worlds we inherit. Descending from the observation platform, Ethan and Scout moved carefully through the winding corridors, the air carrying a chill that hinted at the approaching evening, while sunlight faded into muted gold through the narrow slits above. Each step revealed new details, faint markings etched into the stone, subtle grooves worn by decades of use, and small objects tucked into recesses that had escaped notice during earlier explorations. Scout padded silently ahead, nose low, ears swiveling at every whisper of movement, guiding Ethan with an instinctual precision that he had learned to trust implicitly. Ethan paused at a shelf filled with glass jars, each containing preserved samples of local flora, insects, and minerals, the delicate arrangements suggesting a meticulous observer who had documented the natural world with both care and curiosity. He lifted a small jar, noting the intricate labeling, the careful attention to each specimen's placement, and the faint scent of cedar mingled with the minerals preserved inside. Scout nudged a rolled parchment toward him, tail swishing slowly, and Ethan unrolled it to reveal a detailed sketch of the surrounding cliffs and bay, with subtle annotations marking hidden pathways and vantage points that offered both security and perspective. The corridors seemed to narrow and widen as they moved deeper, the temperature dipping slightly as the stone absorbed the evening chill, and each shadow seemed to hint at a story left behind, waiting for someone to notice the careful placement of objects and the deliberate paths mapped throughout the tower. Ethan found a small alcove where a wooden box had been hidden, the surface coated in decades of dust and cobwebs, and carefully lifted the lid to reveal journals, letters, and a collection of brass instruments polished faintly by time, their mechanisms delicate yet precise, reflecting a mind that valued both observation and creation. He read through a journal entry detailing the cycles of wind, tide, and light, noting how each observation was cross-referenced with drawings of the tower itself, its hidden chambers, and the surrounding cliffs, an interconnected map of knowledge that spoke to patience, dedication, and an intimate understanding of the environment. Scout's paw tapped on a loose stone near the edge of the alcove, drawing Ethan's attention to another hidden compartment containing a small key and a series of folded papers, each annotated with notes about how to maintain the tower, preserve the instruments, and interpret the natural signals of the bay. Ethan traced his fingers over the notes, sensing the care and foresight embedded in each line, the intention of someone who had meticulously planned for a future observer to find these hidden treasures and understand their meaning. The light shifted, casting long shadows that danced across the stone floor and the carefully preserved objects, creating a sense of movement and life in the otherwise still chamber. Scout pressed close, nudging Ethan gently with his nose, a silent companion in both discovery and reflection, and together they moved through the space, uncovering hidden panels, examining artifacts, and piecing together the legacy left behind. Every object told a story, every annotation provided insight, and every step deepened Ethan's connection to the previous occupant, instilling a quiet reverence for the meticulous preservation of knowledge and memory. The tower itself seemed to breathe with them, guiding each careful movement, whispering in the echoes of stone and wood. And as Ethan explored, he understood that their inheritance was not merely the structure, but the responsibility to continue the story, to honor the attention, patience, and loyalty that had built a legacy waiting decades for discovery. The fading sunlight illuminated Scout's fur and the stone walls with a warm glow, a reminder that the quiet care of the past had led them to this moment, a moment of connection, understanding, and the profound realization that some places exist not only to be occupied, but to be experienced, studied, and preserved with reverence and attention. Ethan followed Scout down a narrow spiral staircase that led deeper into the hidden levels of the Watchtower, the stone walls cool and damp beneath his gloved hands, faint echoes of their movement mingling with the distant cry of gulls over the bay. The air grew heavier, carrying the subtle scent of cedar, iron, and sea salt, a reminder of the decades the tower had stood watch over the cliffs and water below. Scout padded silently ahead, nose low, tail brushing against Ethan's leg, guiding him to a small, concealed door along the far wall. Ethan pressed against the latch, and the panel swung open, revealing a hidden chamber bathed in soft, muted light from a narrow slit in the stone. Inside, the room was lined with shelves filled with journals, maps, and meticulously preserved instruments, each item arranged with deliberate care. Ethan bent to examine a set of journals bound in leather, pages yellowed but pristine, filled with detailed observations of tides, wind patterns, and the behavior of wildlife around the tower. Each note was precise, reflecting a life of attentive observation and thoughtful preservation, a meticulous record intended to be discovered by someone who could understand its significance. Scout nudged a rolled map toward Ethan, tail swishing, eyes alert and amber, indicating another hidden section of the room. Ethan unrolled the map, revealing carefully marked pathways, hidden compartments, and annotations describing subtle environmental cues, all part of a complex design woven into the Watchtower structure. The quiet was profound, punctuated only by the soft scuffle of Scout's paws and the distant, gentle echo of water hitting rocks below. Ethan traced lines of ink with his fingers, imagining the previous occupant moving through these halls, recording, observing, and preserving knowledge with an almost sacred attention to detail. He carefully lifted a small brass instrument, examining the delicate etchings and mechanisms, realizing that each object carried not only practical purpose, but also the weight of intention and foresight. Scout pressed close to Ethan, amber eyes reflecting the faint light, signaling that the next discovery lay just beyond a low doorway partially concealed by stacked crates. Ethan moved the crates aside, revealing a shallow alcove containing letters, tools, and personal mementos, each piece telling a story of patience, dedication, and thoughtfulness. The air in the chamber carried a quiet energy, the subtle vibration of the stone underfoot mingling with the soft hum of wind through cracks above, giving the space a sense of life and continuity. Ethan ran his hands over the carefully arranged objects, sensing the rhythm and care embedded in every detail, realizing that this was more than an inheritance of space. It was a legacy of observation, foresight, and quiet devotion. Light shifted through the narrow slit, illuminating brass instruments, journals, and diagrams, each shadow stretching and bending across the floor, creating patterns that seemed almost alive. Scout pawed at a loose stone, guiding Ethan to a hidden recess containing a folded map and small keys, artifacts that had been preserved to guide the next person who would honor the tower's history. Ethan carefully examined each item, reading annotations and tracing lines on maps, absorbing the meticulous records of tides, winds, and natural observations that reflected the previous occupants' deep connection to the world outside. The chamber seemed to exhale, a quiet acknowledgement of their presence, and Ethan felt the profound responsibility of being entrusted with this carefully preserved knowledge. Every artifact, every note, every hidden compartment revealed another layer of thought and care, a testament to a life devoted to patience, attention, and understanding. Scout pressed closer, tail moving slowly in measured approval, and Ethan understood that the inheritance was more than the tower itself. It was the responsibility to preserve, learn, and continue the story that had waited decades for someone ready to notice, appreciate, and carry it forward. The faint light shifted again, highlighting the maps, journals, and instruments, and Ethan took a deep breath, the cool, salt-tinged air filling his lungs as he felt the weight, the history, and the quiet wonder of discovery settle around him. Together, man and dog moved carefully through the hidden chambers, guided by instinct, intuition, and the subtle pulse of a legacy that had been waiting patiently, ready to reveal its lessons, its care, and its quiet story to those willing to honor it. Ethan and Scout moved carefully through the Watchtower's hidden corridors, the air cool and tinged with the scent of cedar and sea salt, the stone walls absorbing the last golden rays of the fading afternoon sun. Each step echoed softly, the sound mingling with the faint creak of timber and the distant rush of water far below the cliffs. Scout's paws made gentle taps on the uneven floor, tail low, ears alert, guiding Ethan with the subtle intuition that had always been their silent communication. They entered a chamber that appeared to be a repository for knowledge, shelves lined with journals, instruments, and maps meticulously preserved and organized, each item telling a story of patient observation and thoughtful care. Ethan knelt to lift a bundle of letters bound with ribbon, the paper yellowed but intact, revealing meticulous handwriting detailing the rhythms of the bay, wind patterns, and the behavior of birds and small wildlife around the cliffs. The notes conveyed careful observation, a deliberate intention to preserve understanding for someone patient enough to discover it. Scout nosed a small brass compass, and Ethan examined it, noting its delicate mechanisms and finely etched markings, realizing that every item was chosen with care, both practical and symbolic. He followed Scout to a narrow alcove, a recessed space hidden behind a panel of stone, where additional journals, maps, and instruments were tucked away. Each piece seemed to whisper its purpose: to guide, to preserve, and to teach about the environment and the careful architecture of the Watchtower. Ethan ran his fingers along the spines of the journals, reading passages that reflected the previous occupant's devotion to recording every detail with patience, attention, and reverence for the natural world. Scout pawed at a loose floorboard, indicating yet another secret compartment containing folded papers, notes on tides, weather patterns, and observations that connected the rhythms of the natural world to the construction of the tower. Ethan unrolled one of the maps, tracing the careful lines that revealed hidden compartments, pathways, and vantage points, understanding the subtle logic that guided the design. The quiet was profound, punctuated only by Scout's soft movements and the distant sound of waves against the rocks, creating a sense of timelessness as if the tower itself were breathing. Sunlight shifted through narrow windows, illuminating brass instruments, journals, and maps, casting patterns that seemed alive with history. Ethan felt a connection to the mind that had organized this space, sensing patience, thoughtfulness, and care woven into every detail. Scout sat briefly at his side, tail flicking, amber eyes bright and observant, affirming the importance of their discoveries. Ethan realized that this inheritance was more than a structure. It was the responsibility to preserve, interpret, and continue a legacy built with deliberate attention to both knowledge and environment. Every object, note, and hidden compartment revealed the foresight of someone who understood the value of observation, reflection, and careful documentation. The chamber seemed to acknowledge their presence, the air carrying a quiet reverence for those who would honor and continue the story held within its walls. Ethan inhaled deeply, absorbing the mixture of scents, stone, cedar, salt, and felt a profound sense of purpose settle over him. Scout nudged his hand gently, a reminder that they were partners in this exploration, and together they moved carefully through the chamber, uncovering and examining, following the subtle guidance embedded in every detail. Time passed unnoticed, filled with quiet attention, reverent discovery, and the gentle rhythm of footsteps, paws, and the soft whisper of wind through the tower. The Watchtower, once silent and forgotten, had opened itself to them, offering knowledge, history, and understanding, and Ethan recognized that the true inheritance was not only the tower but the lessons it held, waiting for attentive eyes, careful hands, and the loyalty and insight of a companion like Scout to bring its story fully to life. Ethan and Scout emerged from the hidden chambers into the tower's upper landing, the fading sunlight casting long, warm beams across the worn stone floors and highlighting the texture of the walls that had held centuries of secrets. The wind rushed through the narrow windows, carrying the salty scent of the bay and the faint aroma of pine, rustling the edges of maps and journals Ethan had carefully carried with him. Scout pressed close, ears swiveling, tail brushing against Ethan's leg, a silent partner in the quiet awe that filled the space. From the landing, the view stretched out over the cliffs and water, waves breaking gently below, and Ethan felt a deep sense of connection, both to the land and to the careful hands that had preserved these spaces for someone like him to find. He laid out the journals, maps, and instruments on a flat stone surface, arranging them with deliberate care, letting the golden light illuminate the pages and brass, revealing the intricate details of observations and designs that had been kept hidden for decades. Scout nosed a small brass compass, then stepped back, tail flicking as if approving the careful attention Ethan gave to each discovery. Ethan read passages aloud softly to himself, tracing the lines of ink that described tides, wind patterns, and subtle environmental changes, realizing that each note was not only an observation, but also a careful guide, a teaching, and a message from the past. The tower itself seemed to hold its breath around them, a silent witness to the unfolding connection between the present and the decades of thought, care, and devotion preserved within its walls. Ethan knelt beside a wooden box tucked into a corner, lifting the lid to reveal a final set of maps and instruments, each item aligned, as if awaiting his arrival, brass fittings catching the last light of day and reflecting a golden glow across the chamber. Scout pawed gently at a rolled map, urging Ethan to examine it, and as he did, he noticed subtle markings indicating vantage points over the bay and cliffs, hidden compartments within the tower, and paths that had been carefully observed over time. Every line, every note, every preserved object revealed not only the intelligence and foresight of the previous occupant, but also the care and intention with which the tower had been maintained. Ethan's heart lifted as he absorbed the accumulated wisdom, recognizing the quiet miracle of finding such a place preserved and entrusted to someone willing to observe, learn, and continue the legacy. Scout pressed close, tail brushing against Ethan's leg, and in that simple presence, he felt affirmation that together they had discovered something extraordinary, a blend of history, intention, and the quiet guidance of time. He traced his fingers along the edges of journals, unfolded maps, and polished instruments, each artifact telling a story, a lesson, and a message of patience, vigilance, and reverence. The sunlight shifted through the windows, casting a warm, golden glow that seemed to animate the space, revealing details that had gone unnoticed before, the careful etching on brass instruments, delicate lines and hand-drawn maps, the subtle signs of observation and care that spanned decades. Scout's soft exhale, tail flicking slowly, reminded Ethan of the loyalty and attentiveness that had guided them here, and he felt a deep gratitude for the partnership that allowed him to fully appreciate and honor the space. Standing finally, overlooking the cliffs and bay, sunlight fading into the horizon, Ethan felt a quiet resolution settle within him, a sense of belonging and responsibility. The Watchtower, once silent and hidden, had shared its story, and he understood that the true inheritance was not just the stone and wood but the careful preservation of knowledge, intention, and history, a story waiting to be continued by those willing to listen, observe, and care for the legacy left in their hands. Scout nudged his side, eyes bright, and together they stood in the fading light, feeling the quiet satisfaction of discovery, the weight of responsibility, and the profound reminder that the most meaningful treasures are often the ones carefully preserved, patiently awaiting the right hearts to uncover and honor them.